Have you ever asked yourself why certain women live on their own? No boyfriend, no companion, not even appearing as if they're searching for one. The answer isn't isolation, scarcity of choices, or a broken heart. It rests in something more uneasy, more disquieting, something that dismantles everything we were taught about a woman's place. Because when a woman chooses solitude, she isn't losing her way. She's discovering herself. And that kind of self-discovery doesn't arrive with applause, likes, or companionship. It arrives with quiet, fortitude, and a kind of freedom most still can't grasp. No, she isn't lonely. She's discerning. She's not cold. She simply grew weary of burning for people who never wished to feel the heat. There's something deeply threatening about a woman who doesn't require a relationship to feel complete. Because that smashes the logic of control, takes apart the myth of emotional dependence, and exposes a hard truth. Most men have no idea what to do with a woman who doesn't need rescuing. And most women are still learning to see themselves in that silent yet thunderous mirror of power. Carl Jung once said that everything we refuse within ourselves becomes part of our shadow. And many of these single women are in fact reflections of the collective shadow. They are what many dream of becoming, yet few dare to embody. They don't shout for love. They murmur their choices. They don't exhibit themselves to draw attention. They withdraw to preserve themselves. They're less invested in charming princes and more in their own peace. And that unsettles people because, while the world demands urgency to be with someone, these women have discovered the power of being with themselves. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend isn't adrift. She's operating on a different plane, a plane where nothing is pleaded for, it's chosen, where approval isn't required, presence suffices. And perhaps that's why she ignites so much criticism, so much judgment, so many attempts to label or define her. But what many still fail to grasp is that behind her apparent absence is a presence that fills, that transcends, that challenges the emotional status quo. She doesn't want any old love. She wants something that doesn't make her smaller. And until that arrives, she stands strong, whole, complete. Maybe you don't understand it right now. Maybe you think it's exaggeration, pride, or woundedness in disguise. But deep down, far down, there's a question within you, a quiet one that throbs even when you try to ignore it. What if that quiet path is actually the only one that leads to the most vital kind of love? The one that begins with you. The silence surrounding a woman who lives alone is not a void. It's a sanctuary. And those who don't grasp the value of that space often call her cold, distant, or even arrogant. But what few notice is that she didn't build that fortress to shut the world out. She built it so as not to lose herself. Carl Jung also said that everything we refuse to face in ourselves, we end up projecting onto others. And maybe that's why so many women still confuse solitude with absence, when in truth it can be fertile ground for self-discovery. While most try to fill themselves through external connections, this woman turned her gaze inward. And there, in the vastness of her own unconscious, she faced the ghosts she'd avoided for years. Childhood wounds, unspoken abandonments, attachments masquerading as love. Her choice to be alone didn't arise from an open wound, but from a scar that finally healed. She didn't stop believing in love. She simply stopped accepting what others called love when it only made her feel smaller. This woman knows chaos. She's loved to the point of losing herself. She's given too much. She's begged for crumbs that never should have been offered to begin with. But at some point, she woke up. And that awakening wasn't sudden. It was a string of disappointments that stopped hurting and started teaching. What you see now isn't cold. It's emotional maturity. And maturity is frightening because it demands presence, depth, and truth. She doesn't want just any company. She wants reciprocity. She's no longer drawn to promises, but to real presence. So perhaps that's why she seems unreachable to many. Because she doesn't want to be saved. She wants to be seen. And that requires more than charm or sweet words. It takes courage to plunge into the depths where few dare to go. And that's where many give up, not because she's difficult, but because she's whole. And when a woman becomes whole, she awakens two extremes in the world: admiration and fear. Admiration from those who are also seeking that wholeness. Fear from those who still live in halves, waiting for someone else to make them feel complete. She doesn't want to complete anyone. She wants to overflow alongside someone who has also found themselves. Until then, she remains alone, not by fate's whim, but out of loyalty to her own soul. This woman isn't hiding. She's protecting herself. There's a vast difference between isolating and preserving oneself. But the world doesn't readily accept a woman like this. A world that still preaches that happily ever after only exists in pairs. A world that mistrusts those without a partner, as if that were a mark of failure. Carl Jung once said that where convention reigns, there's little room for authenticity. And this woman doesn't live by convention. She lives by essence. She hears phrases like, "You're too picky, you should be more open, nobody's perfect." And she smiles. A calm, steady, almost ironic smile, because she knows what many label picky is simply the bare minimum. The minimum it took her decades to realize she deserves. She's not looking for perfection. She's looking for someone mature enough to love without destroying. Someone who's done the inner work she has already faced. And let's be honest, that's not something you find on just any street corner. The discomfort she provokes isn't in what she says, it's in what she embodies. She's living proof that it's possible to be happy without relying on anyone else. And that rips masks off. Men who feed on female insecurity feel threatened. Women still trapped in the need for approval feel judged. But she's not here to confront anyone, she's simply being. And the authenticity of someone who has freed herself is, by itself, a brutal mirror to those still living in chains. This woman isn't in a rush. She doesn't need to speed things up to please anyone. She respects her own pace. And for that, she stirs a quiet fury in a society that wants everything now. She wants depth while the world chases distractions. She wants presence while the world offers only shallow availability. She longs for soul-level bonds while everyone else is trying to look interesting on the next Instagram story. And when she says no, it's not a game, it's truth. When she walks away, it's not drama, it's self-defense. When she chooses to stay home instead of going out with someone empty, it's not arrogance, it's clarity. And that clarity, earned through pain and surrender, is her greatest revolution. Because she doesn't live to please, she lives to be. And that simple act, being, is what makes her so dangerous to the system. Perhaps what unsettles people most about this woman isn't her solitude. It's the peace she's discovered within herself. Carl Jung taught that those who look outward dream, but those who look inward awaken. And it was precisely that inner journey that she undertook. It wasn't easy. It was a grueling process of peeling off masks, facing the ghosts of emotional dependency, and rebuilding herself piece by piece. She no longer defines herself through others' eyes. She sees herself through her own gaze. And that changes everything. How many times have you asked whether being alone is failure or freedom? How often have you felt the need to justify yourself for not having someone at your side? This woman has felt that too. She once believed there was something wrong with her for being alone in a world that idolizes couples, even unhappy ones. But one day she realized it's better to be alone than to be invisible in a relationship. And that day she made a pact with herself. Never again would she take less than what she truly deserves. Her path isn't a straight line. There are days of doubt, moments of nostalgia, nights of deep silence. But there's also a strength that grows with each choice made in awareness. She learned that true love doesn't cage, doesn't consume, doesn't manipulate. The love she wants is the kind that liberates, that adds, that supports without suffocating. And until that love arrives, she chooses to keep growing on her own. not out of pride, but out of integrity. This woman is the living embodiment of Jung's individuation. She shattered, faced her shadow, plunged into the unconscious, and returned more whole than ever. And now that she recognizes herself, she refuses to be half of anything again. She doesn't want someone to complete her. She wants someone to share that awareness with. That's intimidating because it demands emotional responsibility. And sadly, few are willing to love responsibly. Most still love out of lack, out of possession, out of fear. And if she walks alone today, it's because every step rings with learning. Every no she gives is an act of self-respect. Every absence she imposes is a reminder that love should never be begged for. She no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. And that certainty, born from the deepest part of her soul, transforms everything around her. Because a woman who has rediscovered herself becomes dangerous, not because of her weapons, but because of her clarity. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend is not the same woman who once begged to be loved. Something inside her cracked, and it was precisely that fracture that set her free. Because sometimes only in collapse does the soul find its new shape. Carl Jung used to say that the tree that grows to heaven must also have roots that reach down to hell. And that's exactly what she lived through. She descended into the hell of her own story, faced ancestral fears, inherited pain, traumas that weren't only hers, but those of all the women who came before her. She broke cycles. She said no to relationships that repeated the same toxic script. She learned that it wasn't her job to heal anyone, save anyone, or accept crumbs out of fear of being alone. And when she stopped accepting less, the world tried to convince her she was wrong. But she stood her ground, first with uncertainty, then with awareness, and finally with invulnerability, because someone who has lived in their own abyss no longer fears absence. She learns to nourish herself with silence, to warm herself with her own presence. She's not unreachable. She simply no longer allows herself to be invaded. There's a world of difference between opening your heart and letting yourself be torn apart. She opens, yes, but only for those who come in truth, not with rehearsed speeches or empty promises. She's seen enough to tell the difference between presence and performance. Her intuition has become keen. Her energy is a filter. She can sense from afar what lacks depth, and she doesn't hesitate to walk away. Her transformation isn't superficial, it's archetypal. It's as if she's tapped into an ancient wisdom, an old memory that women weren't born to serve, but to express, not to be molded, but to overflow. And in accessing that memory, something woke in her. A wild woman, intuitive, emotionally sovereign, a woman who, though alone, is far from lost. She's in communion with something greater, with her own destiny. And no matter how much they try to reduce her with labels like cold, difficult, distant, nothing sticks because she no longer lives to fit in. She lives to expand. She no longer fights for attention. She radiates presence. She's no longer waiting to be chosen. She does the choosing. And that reversal of logic confuses those who still try to control the feminine. But she's no longer there. She's already crossed the threshold. And on the other side, she discovered that the real relationship begins only after you've loved yourself enough to not need anyone. There's something sacred in the way she moves through the world. She doesn't need applause or public validation. Her confidence is quiet. And it's in that silence that her true strength lives. Carl Jung said that everything we face within eventually becomes our destiny. And perhaps that's why this woman, in choosing herself again and again, has become the author of a destiny that few can understand, but many secretly envy. She no longer tries to fill voids with promises or persuade anyone that she deserves love. She doesn't beg for space in anyone's life because she's learned that presence should never be begged for. It should be invited. And when the invitation doesn't come from truth, She simply declines. She doesn't react with anger or bitterness. She steps away with the dignity of someone who's gotten lost too many times to let the same wound happen again. What few understand is that this woman still longs for love. She still wants to be held, touched, chosen. But she wants it without losing herself, because she's spent too long trying to squeeze into molds too small for the soul she carries. Now she offers herself only where there's room to be whole. And that requires a level of maturity that goes far beyond romance. It requires awareness. It requires having faced one's own shadow and still choosing to love. She's not looking for fairy tales, she's seeking a soul alliance, a connection where there's no domination or submission, where both can grow beside each other without dimming their colors, silencing their pain, or shrinking their dreams. And if that seems too much for some, so be it. Because she'd rather wait than survive on emotional crumbs, and to many that sounds like arrogance. But it's really just self-love in its purest form. We are witnessing a new archetype of woman, a woman who has stepped away from the superficial and dived into the depths, who grew tired of being merely desired and chose to be respected, who chose to be alone not because she gave up on love, but because she began to understand that real love never demands self-denial. And when a woman understands that, her whole world begins to change. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence speaks before any words. Wherever she goes, the energy shifts, like something in the room realigns subtly but unmistakably. This isn't mysticism, it's energy. It's the weight of someone who has already faced the most brutal inner wars and chose to return in peace. Not because she conquered all her fears, but because she learned to live with them without being defeated. Carl Jung would say she found wholeness not by eliminating opposites, but by integrating them. This woman doesn't reject love. She simply learned not to submit to lopsided relationships where one must dim so the other can shine. She longs to love, but in a love where her essence doesn't need to be edited. A love where she can be both shadow and light, laughter and tears, silence and storm. Because she realized that those who only love the pretty parts haven't yet learned what love truly is. And those who demand constant sweetness still don't grasp the beauty of bitterness so necessary for growth. She's too whole to settle for halves, too free to accept prisons disguised as care, too sensitive to endure shallow bonds, and at the same time, strong enough to keep choosing this path, even when it hurts, even when it's lonely, even when it's misunderstood. That is the journey of an awakened soul, giving up instant validation in exchange for deeper truth. Deep down, the world fears women like her, women who don't need, women who don't bow, women who refuse to be molded, because they challenge invisible structures, question old patterns, and break silent emotional contracts that once claimed a woman only has worth if she is with someone. And when she breaks those contracts, when she rewrites her own narrative, she inspires others. And that, for the system, is dangerously revolutionary. So she continues, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes with her chest held high, but always with her feet firmly on the ground, because now she knows she's not alone. She's with herself, and after everything she's lived through, that is more than enough. The love that comes after that won't be salvation. It will be celebration. It won't come to fill her. It will come to overflow. When a woman chooses to walk alone, the world rushes to convince her she's making a mistake. But deep down, she feels something aligning within her. It's not pride or rebellion. It's a rare kind of wisdom that can only be born in silence, the same wisdom Jung called individuation, the process of becoming fully who you are, without masks, without compromise. And when that happens, nothing outside her holds more power than the truth that pulses inside her chest. That truth doesn't need to shout. It can show itself in the way she quietly closes a door without resentment, in how she withdraws when the environment no longer nourishes her, in the way she smiles in peace, even with no one by her side. Because she discovered that being alone is not a punishment. It's a vow of loyalty to her own soul. And the soul of an awakened woman does not submit, does not dim, does not beg. It simply is. And that is enough. The world will keep trying to tell her she's missing something. It will keep offering distractions, plastic princes, love crafted for display, but she's already seen behind the curtain. She's already understood. It's not about finding someone, it's about never losing yourself again. And when that realization blooms, everything changes. Desire becomes discernment, lack becomes choice, waiting becomes a path, and what once hurt now teaches, what once bound now sets free. You can feel it deep within, that stirring, that spark. Maybe it's a memory, an old wound, a nostalgia that never quite made sense. Maybe it's the image of a woman you once knew, or the woman you've become. In either case, something within you is asking to be seen more clearly, something that no longer fits in old molds, something that, if you let it, could completely transform how you relate to love, to others, and most importantly, to yourself. That woman who lives alone is more than just someone who doesn't fit the mold. She is a living symbol of emotional freedom, a reminder that it's possible to rebuild without haste, without fear, and without needing to prove anything to anyone. She doesn't walk ahead of anyone, but she doesn't follow either. She carves her own path, unique, unrepeatable. And along that journey, she lights little fires for others who are waking up too. If something inside you was touched by this story, perhaps it's because, deep down, you too are ready for a new kind of love. A love that begins with reconciliation with yourself. A love that feeds on silence, presence, and truth. A love that can't be negotiated, begged for, or disguised. And if that love hasn't come yet, perhaps it's because you first needed to become the woman who no longer accepts less than she deserves. And if this message found you at the right moment or awakened someone you forgot was living inside you, then I invite you not to keep it to yourself. Share this video with other women who need to remember their own strength. Like it, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Not out of impulse, but out of choice. Because when something touches the soul, the least we can do is let it keep resonating within us and through us.